It was a quiet suburban neighborhood where nothing unusual ever happened, until that evening in late September. Sarah Mitchell, a devoted single mother, had spent the day juggling work and household chores. By the time the sun began to set, she was in the kitchen preparing dinner, expecting her 16-year-old son, Daniel, to walk through the door any minute. He had told her earlier that he was going to meet friends at the park, just a few blocks away. It was something he often did, so Sarah thought nothing of it at first. As the clock ticked past 7, her confidence began to fade. Daniel was never late without letting her know. She tried calling his phone, but the call went straight to voicemail. At first, she assumed the battery had died, but as the minutes turned into an hour, worry began to creep in. She checked her messages, nothing. By 8 o'clock, Sarah grabbed her keys and drove to the park. The place was empty. The swings swayed slightly in the evening breeze, and fallen leaves scattered across the basketball court. There was no sign of her son. Panic surged through her veins. She drove through every nearby street, calling his name, checking with neighbors, and even stopping by his friends' houses. No one had seen him since earlier that afternoon. It was as if he had vanished without a trace. By midnight, Sarah could no longer hold back her fear. She called the police and reported Daniel missing. Officers arrived quickly and searched the neighborhood with flashlights, combing through every corner. They found nothing, no bag, no phone, not even a single clue. Sarah stood in her driveway, trembling, as the flashing red and blue lights reflected off her tear-streaked face. Deep down, she felt it. Something terrible had happened. 2 days had passed since Daniel vanished, and every hour felt like an eternity for Sarah. The police had organized searches, volunteers combed through wooded areas, and missing person flyers with Daniel's photo were plastered across town. Yet, there was no trace of him. Just when hope seemed to be slipping away, a jogger made a chilling discovery near a shallow creek at the edge of town. It was a black hoodie, partially buried in mud, the sleeve torn and damp from the water. The same hoodie Daniel had worn the night he disappeared. The police arrived immediately, sealing off the area as they searched for more evidence. Sarah watched from behind the yellow tape, her heart pounding as she recognized the familiar piece of clothing. Forensics confirmed it belonged to Daniel, and that his DNA was present on it. But there was something even more disturbing. Faint fingerprints were found on the fabric, and they didn't belong to Daniel. Whoever had touched that hoodie had never been in the police system, leaving investigators with no identity to pursue. Hoping for answers, the officers widened the search around the creek, but found nothing else. No phone, no backpack, no signs of a struggle. It was as if Daniel had simply dropped the hoodie and vanished into thin air. But the biggest shock came later that evening when detectives revealed new evidence. A security camera from a nearby street had captured Daniel walking alone toward Pine Street, where an abandoned house stood in silence. The footage was grainy but clear enough to confirm it was him. Why was he going there? He had no reason to visit that place. As Sarah stared at the blurry image of her son's last known moments, a cold dread filled her soul. Something was terribly wrong. The abandoned house on Pine Street stood like a silent witness to something sinister. Its windows were shattered, the roof sagging under years of neglect, and weeds crawled up the cracked walls. When detectives entered, they expected an empty shell, but what they found made the air feel heavier. The rooms were bare, yet the peeling wallpaper hid unsettling details. Strange symbols were drawn on the walls, dark and uneven, as if scrawled in a hurry. On the wooden floor, melted candle wax had hardened in small pools, suggesting some kind of ritual had taken place recently. The most disturbing discovery came when an officer noticed a loose brick near the fireplace. Behind it was an old photograph, folded and worn. It showed Daniel, standing near a convenience store, completely unaware the picture had been taken. The thought of someone secretly following him sent chills down everyone's spine. This was no random disappearance. Someone had been watching him. Forensics swept the house for prints and DNA. They found small traces of blood on the windowsill, fresh enough to suggest recent activity, but not enough to determine whose it was. This clue raised more questions than answers. As detectives dug deeper, they discovered Daniel had recently joined an online community for urban explorers, thrill seekers who visited dangerous, abandoned places and posted pictures for likes and followers. What the police didn't know yet was that this group wasn't just about exploring. It had darker corners, secret chats where members dared each other to enter specific locations. The abandoned house on Pine Street was one of those locations. But if Daniel went there on his own, why was his photo hidden inside the wall? And whose blood was on the window? Each answer only led to a bigger mystery. A week after the discovery at the abandoned house, investigators were running out of leads. Then, out of nowhere, a call came in that changed everything. The voice on the other end was distorted, cold, and almost mechanical. The caller claimed to know what happened to Daniel, and said he was taken because he saw something he shouldn't have. Before the operator could ask for details, the line went dead. It was impossible to trace. Detectives began combing through Daniel's online activity again, this time focusing on private messages in the Urban Exploration group. Buried deep in his chat history, they found a thread that chilled them to the core. Daniel had been talking to someone using the username Watcher89. At first, the messages seemed harmless, just talk about photography and abandoned buildings. But then came the final message, ***, come alone. Don't tell anyone. I'll show you something unforgettable. It was sent the night he disappeared. Investigators worked quickly to trace the IP address behind the username. It led to a man named Eric Vaughn, a 32-year-old living just a few miles away. Eric had a history of breaking into old buildings and posting videos online. When police showed up at his home, he appeared calm, even cooperative, but his house told a different story. In the basement, behind a locked door, officers found disturbing evidence: old photos of teenagers, maps marking abandoned locations, and a collection of personal items that didn't belong to him. Among them was a pair of sneakers identical to the ones Daniel wore the night he vanished. Eric was arrested immediately, but Daniel was nowhere to be found. Every corner of the house was searched, yet there was no sign of the boy. It was as if Eric had hidden him somewhere. Or Weiss. But deep down, something about Eric's behavior suggested he wasn't working alone. 2 weeks had passed since Eric Vaughn's arrest, but the nightmare was far from over. Sarah hoped the man in custody would finally reveal where Daniel was, yet Eric said nothing. He barely spoke during interrogations, and when he did, his words were cryptic, offering no real answers. Detectives searched through his computer and phone, uncovering videos of abandoned places and disturbing photos of strangers. Still, there was no sign of Daniel. Everyone feared the worst, that he was gone forever. Then, one morning, Sarah walked out to her mailbox and found an envelope with no return address. Her hands trembled as she tore it open. Inside was a single Polaroid photo. It showed Daniel, alive, sitting in a dark room with his hands tied. His eyes were wide, filled with fear, and in his lap was a piece of cardboard with one word written on it, ***run. Forensics confirmed the photo was recent. Someone had taken it after Eric was arrested. That meant one terrifying thing: Eric wasn't acting alone. Detectives reopened the investigation, now looking for accomplices. Evidence from Eric's basement revealed symbols and notes tied to a secret network, a group obsessed with hunting and trapping victims for twisted entertainment. Authorities linked them to several disappearances across the country. Each case had the same pattern: young victims lured through online groups, last seen near abandoned buildings, and never found again. The search for Daniel became part of a much larger operation. Despite nationwide alerts, there were no more photos, no calls, no ransom demands. It was as if Daniel had vanished into a dark world that operated in the shadows. For Sarah, life turned into endless waiting. She kept his room exactly the same, clinging to hope that one day he would come home. But the photo in her drawer served as a cruel reminder: someone still had her son, and they were watching.